What up? It's Our Strange Ideas. I'm Danny, and this is my boy Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hell yeah. Praise Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So today, the topic I kind of wanted to talk about is false certainty. Because you kind of, especially for me, where I came from a place where I did believe, I went on a mission and then became an atheist, I have an interesting perspective on how people can come to believe in God or know that they believe in God, since I've been working on that process for like 18 years.
We're talking about them I knows people. The ones that know and they will never let go of that I know.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. So I'm going to ask you, Chris, like, from your perspective, especially because you kind of fell out at an early stage, I don't know if you ever felt like you could say you know, or even that you really, really believe. So, like, how do you think people get there, and what was your experience in trying to?
Well, my experience was I was one of those I know, because that's what everyone told me that I know. Because when you're 8 or less than that, and you're told to believe in this thing, it's hard to not believe in it, because you trust your parents, you trust those that are telling you these things, because they're nice to you, they're giving you housing, food, they're just providing for all your basic needs, and they're like, plus, you believe in this. And 8-year-old Chris was like, cool, I believe in that, I'm getting all this shit, and so I'm gonna believe in that.
Right.
Yeah, there was a time to where I said, I know, and it reminds me because in the Mormon church, every first Sunday of the month, it's a fast Sunday, which is part of our, well, I shouldn't say our since we're X, but is part of their belief system. And there's a thing called testimony meeting. It's where you bear your testimony. It's where you bear all your I knows of the church. And basically, the I knows usually go like this. I know Joseph Smith is a prophet. I know that this is the last true church. I know that this is an X or this is Y. But it mostly falls on that skew. Usually that I know God loves us. I know Joseph Smith is a prophet. I know God is real / I know that this is the true church. And you're going to hear some other variants, but it all really encompasses those main points. And yeah, and basically once I hit 8 to 12, I was pretty much just saying it, not because I knew, because people told me I knew. And eventually I realized I didn't know / I didn't really care, because at the time I was unhappy in the church, and I figured if God was so great and if the church was so great, I would be happy there and I would actually enjoy my time. But since I didn't, and I fell into slight depression and all the other goodies, I just left, because at that point I didn't care, because it just became an environment that was more hostile / unhealthy than a healthy one, and I've been better ever since.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I definitely had a similar beginning experience where it's like, you know, your whole life you're just told, hey, we believe in this, and like, we know this to be true, and so you just kind of identify with that as a child. Yeah. And, like, without, like, meaning to brainwash you, like, it kind of just does, because you just accept that as something you know.
Oh, yeah.
And so for, like, the first, like, probably similar, like, 12 years, I just believed that I knew this was true. Not necessarily because I ever had an experience, but just because I was continually identifying with that. Yeah. And so I just always associate it. And then what happens is you kind of just build the narrative as you go.
Exactly.
And I think this is one of two ways you can get there. But, like, essentially you have a prayer and you might feel good about something. You'd be like, oh, I feel good, that's the spirit. And then you're excited that you feel the spirit, and you kind of just build it up into this whole thing. And even at the time, you're probably, at least my experience is like, oh, is this the spirit? Is this God? But then after the fact, you're like, oh, that must have been God. And then suddenly you know that was God, and you know that was the answer.
Well, yeah, it was like, I shouldn't say like so much. It was when I prayed to win church basketball, and then I won church basketball, and it was so cool to me. I felt so good, and I was just,
right,
man, this must be God.
Right, because
I just won the game that I wanted to win, and that dopamine, those chemicals were just inside my head, and I
Right.
felt the same effects as I would if I didn't pray to God. It was just that I won, but I connected those dots because I was already trained to do that.
Right, you're trained to connect the dots. And that's how I really think people get there, especially like if people who don't come from the church, who don't come from believing, they kind of find themselves in like an environment where they're being told like, this is everything you're supposed to know. This is what you will get if you do these things. And so as they search for it, hoping to find something more in life, because without diving into it, like, not believing in God can be a scary thought. So you want to. So you go in, you start praying. You might get a good feeling like about something, like maybe thinking about an afterlife or meeting a lost loved one. And you get those good feelings and you're like, oh, this must be the Spirit. And then you get more excited, and it's kind of this positive feedback loop.
Yep.
That can really just convince you that this is true. And I kind of fell for that for a long time. And that's kind of why I believed in the church so long. But I kind of could recognize the feedback loop. And every time there was always a link where I was like, I always asked myself, would I feel good in this situation even if there was no God? And almost every time the answer was still yes. Or like the feeling that I'm feeling
That's a good question.
would correlate. And so I always said I believed, but I could never get to the point where I could say I know, at least after like 13, 14, when I was in more of a condition to actually be thinking. And that problem just persisted and persisted. Like on my mission, I remember one person told me that when they came to know that God was real was when they were praying about whether or not they would ever see their past grandfather again.
And that where it shows the answer they already want.
Right. And so, like, of course you're going to feel great about that. And so, once again, it checked that mark of, like, would you feel this feeling anyways? And then another one where they're like, oh, how do you not feel the Spirit in this situation? Was when, like kind of a prized member of a community was going off to college. He was kind of like the wonder child in that small church.
Uh-huh.
And so everyone's super excited. He's leaving for college. They gave him a blessing, the Melchizedek priesthood. And there was just such a warm feeling. And everybody's like, wow, like I've never felt the Spirit so strong. But then I asked myself, like, you're sending this person you love off to college and you're giving them like this congratulations, like kind of like wrapping up everything they're doing here in an achievement, and giving them the gift of the Melchizedek priesthood. But that could also just be like a symbolic rite of passage. And I was like, would we all be feeling great if there is no God? And once again, it checked that box.
Yeah. But what's also great is why we feel good is because women can't get the Melchizedek priesthood. That's another check.
Yeah, that's another check where you can feel great.
You can feel great and be like, at least men are getting it.
All right, now we can also check that sexist box
No,
off.
that's right.
Here we
That helps the feel good
Right.
process. Is that
'Cause
men are getting a leg up.
We're atheists, so we actually just don't have morals. So it's
Exactly.
okay.
Yeah, exactly. Remember, we're not here to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
Remember that.
Always remember, we're not trying to make the world better.
We're all, as atheists, we make the world worse.
Yeah, and so I was kind of just going to ask you about like your experience around that, or like maybe people who have shared their testimony with you, if it reflects a similar theme.
Oh, yeah. Like, it's crazy.
Alrighty, we made a quick pause, but now we're back.
But now we're back, ready again. Tell your friends. But back to my experiences on the I knows and what people have declared to be the I knows. Usually it was just all self-conforming, talking to another member, being, oh man, did you feel it right then? It's like, yeah, I did. Not because I really did, but because they said I should, and that I did. That's what I just
Then you start reaching
put it
inside,
in there,
looking
and been like,
for
yeah, I did have a good feeling. I did feel a good feeling there. So if I had a good feeling, and they felt it too, then it's together, right? It's all a part of the same system. While in actuality, we were just having fun. We were talking, and we both just agreed on things. And just agreeing with things with people actually does just make you feel good. Strangely enough, having conversations to where you are enjoying your time and you are having an experience with someone is awesome. And so, yeah, it made me have good feelings, and some of that was applied to things not really in the church because it was kind of an environment I did not enjoy, but outside the church where we were at church events such as mutual or things of that nature, even scouting, because scouting at that time, I don't know if it still is, but at that time was very connected with the church.
Yeah, the Mormon church just essentially use scouting as like a young men's, young women activity to kind of continue outside of Sunday
Exactly.
meetings.
And and since I would have such a good time there, I enjoyed it a lot. And what's crazy is that my best friend was clearly not Mormon, but he would go to scouting with me. And I remember he was like my project, being, oh man, I'm going to convert him and everyone's going to be so proud of me. I'm going to be proud of me. He's going to have a better life. And strangely enough, his influence turned into the opposite, which I'm so happy it did. But yeah, but I wanted to hit this story though really hard was when I actually tried to prove to myself that you can fake the spirit. And it was around when I was 16, maybe I was 17, but I was told to give a talk during church, and this was when I was rarely going, but I had enough presence there that they would still ask me to do things. And I was like, of course I'm going to give the talk, because I was taught never say no, because that's just what you're not supposed to do. And I'm like, great, I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to lie 100% about everything, and I'm going to see if we can feel the spirit. And it was crazy. Well, it wasn't actually a planned event, so I should caveat that. It's not a planned event that I was going to do that. What was actually happening was I was too lazy to make a talk. And since I was too lazy to make a talk, I ended up lying about everything on there because I just wanted to get it over with. So it really wasn't a planned malicious event. It was more of just, I kind of turned it into that because I just was too lazy to actually make a 15-minute talk for church. Yeah. And, but yeah, I ended up making a talk, and I even remember one of the quotes, that I had, because I know, one of our, congregation, gave the quote after the next week. He said to quote me, which I thought was really cool since it quoted me but I was like, it was a cool enough quote that he quoted me. But the quote was, God is a lot like a light bulb. If you just leave it there, the light's always shining, but it's dusty. But it gets dusty if you don't eventually clean it and repolish your connection. And so I was like, that's why you have to revisit it, repolish your connection, and get the light to shine as brightly as possible within you. And that was kind of where it was around. It sounded a lot better when I did it. Mm-hmm. But, yeah. But, basically, yeah, I ended up lying, and people told me that they felt the spirit so strongly during the talk that they know that I was meant to be in the church. And it was the same thing. People were telling my parents that. They told me that. And I realized I didn't feel anything. I was like, wow, I lied. I didn't tell the truth. And people say God only gives you this conforming message if you're telling the truth. And if it's true, right. And if like God approves of it. And since all these people trained in this area, trained to be able to tell you that like that would be the spirit or that would not be the spirit, including the bishop and other members of the presidency. And it just destroyed my view on the I knows and that full certainty. Because if you can fake it, then it's a reproducible feeling based on just good feelings. And that's when I just realized that this church is just not as true, or it's not true at all. And that was really the big moment where I decided to leave.
Yeah, that makes sense, because it's just like, oh, like everything I'm taught that this is how we recognize, and everyone's so sure they're recognizing it right, but you know that like everyone just recognized this wrong.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, then what can you trust? And that just comes down to the fact of like how all religions hinge on like this emotional drive.
Oh, yeah.
To want to believe. And
it doesn't just hinge on it. It expects people to use it.
Right. And it's just kind of like a ridiculous standpoint, especially when you think about like coming to know something as true. If you have to already deeply desire it to be true before you can figure out if it's true, that's just like that's just a really bad way to try to come to know something.
Oh yeah, it goes against the scientific method in every regard.
Right. And yeah, and it puts you in that position where if you don't come to know it's true, it's always your fault. You didn't want to believe it. You didn't
have
care enough.
You didn't have the faith
right.
or the ambition or desire to go figure out what was true while you were doing the work. So you obviously had something going, but you just didn't do the work correctly. Therefore, you're the bad person. God didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, and this is kind of an area where I feel like I have kind of a unique perspective just because I was out on my mission. I was preaching God's word 24/7, and I was living like the most, top tier standards because you're 24/7 with a companion who's kind of holding you up to those standards because you're like kind of checking for each other. So I was living that, I was preaching, and I wanted to believe so bad. Like the worst feeling is being out there and not knowing if it's true while I'm teaching it every day, testifying to people. Like that was just a horrible feeling. And so I really wanted to know. And I was like praying every night, reading the scriptures every night. And every time it was just always uncertainty about what I am feeling. And so that's when I really just came to accept the fact that like there isn't an effective way to come to know.
Yeah.
Because everything that you're taught should show you whether you know always checks that box of like, would I be feeling this anyways? Or am I actually certain this is true? Or do I just want to believe it is? And because there's some evidence pointing towards it, I'm just going to go for it. And I came to terms with like, especially when you read the Book of Mormon, it talks about how like people who don't believe are like, they're horrible. And like one guy's punished. He like makes a guy blind just because he didn't believe he was the prophet. I can't remember the exact quote. It's been a while. And so I'm just like, well, like I'm over here and I don't know. Right. And it's obvious to me because I'm working my butt off trying to know that it's not easy. So if you're going to turn and make this guy blind just for wanting to know the truth, like that's fucked up.
Oh yeah. Well, there's so many things you can point to where it's God's just so fucking nuts. Like, his ego is so fragile that he can just turn on someone so quickly and destroy their life just for being like, whoa, like, this is crazy. And then just goes boom. And what's so interesting is when you're in the church, you're not told that this, like, you don't ask for evidence or anything of that nature. Because when you're 8, you don't really care to see the evidence or even care to understand it because you were just told that it's true. And since you were just told that it's true, you believe it. So you don't think any of these things are crazy or out of the ordinary. And what makes it so sad is that what that teaches that 8 to 12-year-old or whatever age range you want to put it, that's okay. That's an okay action for God to do. That it's okay for God to smite someone or to hurt someone in an event that they might just have a little doubt in their heart.
Yeah, and it just
instead of a teaching moment that we would expect every other person to do would be to teach and to show them. Instead, for him, it's okay to just hurt them and
He's
abuse.
Just obviously just like a brutal dictator in the fact that like if you like one of the biggest things you can do, like one of the worst things you can do is just not to believe in him. And in a world where it's so hard to figure that out, that is clearly just like in no way just or merciful in any fashion.
Well, then it even goes to the thing like, what if it could even be the fact that it's not that you don't believe, it's that you believe in the wrong version of him.
Right, and that's like even worse.
And that's even worse.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man, I see so much evidence for Baal because Baal is so cool. And you don't know the difference between Baal and Yahweh, but since you're still worshiping Baal, God's like, you are disgusting. And all that person might have needed was, hey, Baal is wrong, I'm Yahweh, vote for me. Vote for Yahweh 2020. And then he could have voted for Yahweh, but instead, he only knew a Baal on the ballot box, checked that Baal box, put it in because that's the only candidate he knows, and then he gets smitten to death.
Yeah, so again, pulling it back to like the standards we would hold normal people to. Like, we would expect
a perfect being,
Yahweh, the politician, to go over to those people and to teach them and show them that it's wrong. But if they don't accept it and they can't figure that out, like, maybe they're wrong, maybe they're ignorant and being stupid, but like, if they honestly don't believe it, then like, you would expect Yahweh to just accept that and keep trying to educate them, not like damn them to hell.
Well, it goes to the same thing. Like, let's say that this person has a disability, and that disability is a mental disability. If I was in a teaching position and they could not get an answer, and it could actually just be from ignorance, but despite that disability, I'm never going to punish them or even go out to harm them in any capacity, because that's ridiculous. That's abuse. That's abuse in every standard of the word. And since we give, I threw this off into a terrible thing. Sorry. Let's go back to the I knows and I certainties, because we were talking about the abuses of God right now. Sorry. When you said that though, and I was like, my feelings are strong, and you know what that means? Felt the Spirit.
I feel that. Well, I mean, to talk about the abuses of God in that area actually somewhat makes sense, because they reinforce that false certainty, because you're taught that if you don't reach that certainty, it is your fault, or you're even
that's true,
evil in a way. And so
heart of hearts,
you feel trapped there and confused, especially if you're not finding the answer.
And alone.
Right. Yeah, definitely super alone. And it definitely creates this fake it until you make it trend in the church, which I think way more people fall under through all sorts of religious categories than they would admit publicly.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, even just having a conversation with our dad, it's clear that he has tons of questions and tons of disagreements.
Right.
But he just goes back to, well, this is the best thing I can find, therefore it's true.
That also falls along the lines of, like, just as, like, some people would struggle to admit these doubts to other people, I think many, including myself back when I was on my mission, like, have trouble admitting it to themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Because
you
once
you admit it to yourself, you know that you're the problem, because that's what the church tells you.
Right. And so you're just kind of just thrust into this position of just always trying to know that God is true.
And what's also interesting is just to kind of throw it into a new direction, is basically the evidence that we take the I knows to. So once we accept one I know and it goes to another I know, we then create I think it's like an apologist train of I knows. So it's like, well, despite these doubts, despite these things, I've already said that I know, and since I know this X, Y, Z, the church has to be true, because I know, basically, since you've like reinforced yourself to so much I knows, it kind of throws those doubts and it throws those things underground, or at least beneath you, because you're going to always show that first to people, and even to yourself when you're trying to hide it, even from yourself, because you're just like, wait, I'm having a question, but I know. And so once you start questioning it, the I knows start coming back out. I didn't really explain that in a very good way, but basically what I was trying to say was, once you begin questioning, the I knows then surface, and you can throw away those questions, because you first go to the I know. Like, you're like, wait, if I already know this, then why am I questioning it? Because what a famous talker once gave, Dieter Uchtdorf, in conference was, don't doubt your faith, doubt your doubts first.
Right.
And that whole idea is just insane to me, because it always puts this idea of you should always believe in the I knows in your faith first, rather than even just giving your doubts the chance. Because really, when you doubt something, that is a good thing, because that means that you're actually questioning what you believe, and you're actually going out for the truth. Because even just in, if we take religion out of it, even in a scientific concept, it's great to have doubts.
Right. It just shows
science encourages
intellectual
doubts.
honesty.
And science encourages doubts. It's like, great. If you have a doubt, you can try to prove it. You can try to use the scientific method to disprove it, and science is always willing to accept the better answer.
Right. That's one thing I always find funny when people talk about science. Like, oh, science claims they know all these things. It's like, no. Like, science claims, like, that this is the most likely thing that they believe, but they encourage people to disagree and then to use, like, logical pathways to prove them wrong. Like, science isn't, like... The difference between science and God is science can be wrong.
Yeah.
They're allowed to be wrong.
They're fine with being wrong, too.
Because it's all about learning and progressing, whereas God is like, I am absolutely true. So, like, Dad always talks about that we give science, like, a free pass where we don't give God a free pass, but that's because science isn't claiming to be perfect.
Oh, yeah.
God is.
Oh, yeah. And to go back on that, people will be like, well, I've gotten pushback from scientists saying that this is true. And the thing is that you will receive pushback because they have to push back the current narrative of what science has established, like gravity. If someone says gravity's not real, you're going to receive pushback being like, no, it's real because I can consistently drop this, and once I drop it, it hits the ground, and we can all see that happen, and it happens every time. And once we can see that, you're going to receive pushback for some ideas. It's the same thing with evolution. While people will be like, oh, evolution's a more contested topic. In some areas, yes, but pretty much it's been established as a true fact. And if you can't get past that, you're going to receive pushback from it. And that's not being a pushback of dogmatic. It's more of a pushback being, this is what we have established. If you can change it, that's fantastic, but you have to actually go out and prove it. And, And then science is putting the onus on everyone to basically, we have to prove what we say, and that's the best explanation we have so far. And there could be a better one, and we're just waiting for that. We're just waiting for the better explanation.
Right. And so that's kind of like the difference in certainty between like God and science. To kind of tie it back to those simple truths you were talking about, and this will probably be where we wrap up. In fact, in the church, they often teach you to use those like those truth statements, because like they'll be like, oh, you might have a question about this, like, why can't women have the priesthood in the Mormon church, or like, you know, why is like a place where so many priests are supposed to be like spiritual and so good molesting so many kids in the Catholic Church, right? You have those questions, but they teach you to go, well, you can think like, I don't understand that, but what do I know? I know Christ is our Savior. And because I know that, I know that somehow this fits within his plan. I can't explain it, but I know this, therefore this doesn't matter right now.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to explain, was once you have so many I knows lined up, you can then push other things under the rug and under yourself, because you're like, these are problems within our community, within this society of religiosity, within the church. But because these things are true, these things don't really matter, or they're just inconsequential to the plan, or they're a part of his plan, and you can rationalize it in one of those few ways, or it's a part of his plan and it needs to happen so that God's plan can come to fruition. It's I remember talking to one, and they're like, oh man, it's a miracle that this person survived in this tragic tragedy. And I'm like, yeah, it's so sad that the other 70 people had to die and this one survived. God is so generous to letting that one person survive when 70 other people had to die. And they looked at me, wow, that's just a weird perspective. Someone survived and you're mad about it. I'm like, no. I'm just sad that God could only extend his grace to one person when he could have saved so many more. Oh,
and like the whole miracle aspect for me. Oh, if I can just go over that real quick.
Oh, yeah, dude. We got plenty of time.
Yeah, I don't think we need to stick too strictly to like a 30-minute podcast.
Yeah, that was just more of like
a general...
God, I gotta stop saying like so much. That was more of just, hey, this is a good idea to stay around, but you know what? Who cares? Because this is for our enjoyment too, and we're gonna talk about what we're fucking talking about. We're atheists.
Yeah, we have no morals.
No morals here.
Yeah. So there's just so many instances where people will talk about like, oh, but look at the odds of this. This proves God. But like my counter argument to that is in a world so big and complex where so many crazy things happen every day, it would be unlikely that unlikely things don't happen to you throughout your lifetime. You know what I mean? So that's just a hard thing to sell.
We always talk about that 1 in a million chance, but there's more than 1 million people in New York, or even Utah for that matter.
Right.
So theoretically, it's going to happen in your state.
To one of those million
one
people,
of those
right?
individuals.
Statistically.
Yeah. And even if we increase those odds, oh man, there's a 1 in a trillion chance that there's a planet out there that can survive life. Well, we're in those odds because there are billions of galaxies, and within those are tons and tons that would reach over 1 trillion planets. And the stars are even just another in new, like, unmeasurable fact.
Talk about the statistic, like, issues with, like, a planet having all the right components and falling in the Goldilocks zone is just kind of ridiculous to me, because it's like, well, you got to think of, like, in a galaxy this massive, it's just entirely unlikely that none of these areas would ever
and science has already
fall
found
in that.
And science has already found 4 other planets that meet the same criteria as Earth does.
Right.
And it's so interesting that they can't think of another thing to come to mind. And it's just called Drake's equation. We are within those odds. People don't think we're within those odds. We are completely within those odds.
Right, and possibly very much within those odds, because we still don't even know, like, how big everything is. Because a lot of I know, like, we're in, the science is a little bit beyond me, but, like, what we can see of the universe, we have no idea if it's at all limited to that. Like, it could be vastly bigger.
Well, the theory is that the universe is still continuously expanding, and the reason why is because, well, this is my limited understanding of it. Is that stars are within a blue shift and a red shift. A blue shift means that they're coming closer to Earth. Red shift means that they're moving away from the Earth, and that's based off the light that they're emitting. And basically, according to my limited knowledge, since all the stars are moving away from the Earth, the current established position is that the universe therefore is constantly expanding. And so what that means is that if it's constantly expanding, it's constantly getting bigger. And so what we see is so far never the edge. We're never going to be able to see the edge because the edge is going to continuously move. And we have no idea what speed that is or no idea what's going on there. But yeah, it's nuts. It's nuts. And the thing is that with matter and with energy always interacting with each other, that means new galaxies are going to be born. New old galaxies are also going to be destroyed based on supernovas and even black holes. But the thing is that if it's constantly growing and constantly going, our odds actually are always increasing. And what's great though is that science also says that we don't know the answer. So even though this is currently established as what we're going to say is truth, even though we don't honestly know because we can't claim that we know everything, but it's the best thing we have right now. But just because of that, we always want to go with our best answer of what we know it is. And I feel like some people always want to go to the unlikely answer when we say that we don't know, because it's like, oh man, I don't know. It's like
I just think of sorry, just to talk about this, like people will another like common argument for how they can know is just like they'd be like, well, look around and like look at everything that is, like, why is this here? Like, you know, then they talk about the odds, but I don't necessarily understand how they go to a solution. Like, it's crazy to think human beings can just like come and exist out of nothing. So the solution is that somehow an all-knowing, omnipotent, all-powerful being came into existence to create them. Like, it's like you're solving a problem by creating a much bigger problem. Because, like, how did that all-knowing being come into existence? And they'll say, like, well, he always was. Like, he always has existed. But it's like, but you can't just be all-knowing and have all experiences, right? Without having those experiences. And so it's like that's even more confusing and like doesn't make sense, So you're solving like a confusing problem that science doesn't necessarily
with
know how to
a more
answer.
confusing answer than the question
Right,
itself.
with a more absurd claim. And so it just kind of hits those points. And
well, usually because I just talked about this at the Halloween party I went to. Because this guy was like, man, he's like, how can evolution just so crazy to me? Because it just has all these it's so complex, and that we would get this such diversity. It's just too much for me to handle sometimes. It's more of, how could this even be true? And why isn't there a creator? And I'm like, well, if you actually look back at our fossil records, and even just our mitochondria, like, you can establish a small amount of chain that shows, because we are, I forgot, Homo sapiens. And since we're Homo sapiens, but we can find Neanderthals, we can find things even further behind the Neanderthal train that more resembled humans. And it just is interesting to be like, it actually makes sense, because we even have Neanderthal DNA in us. And what happens is that you never find, within like the religious perspective, you never find, like, if it's a human, it's a human. And the thing is that we are all humans, but
you never find the actual transition.
Yeah. You never find like the transition, but we do have Neanderthal DNA. So the thing is that we are actually still within a transition. Which is interesting.
Because you're constantly transitioning.
Interestingly enough, though,
quote,
I don't
unquote.
think African Americans do have any Neanderthal DNA.
Oh yeah, there was a study on that.
Yeah, and so it's, I don't know what Neanderthal DNA is for other races, but yeah, so the thing is that we could actually say that right now, Caucasians or Europe Americans, whatever, Caucasians are essentially, we are in a transitional period, because we still have Neanderthal DNA within us.
Right.
And it's actually really cool to see, because we can actually point to evidence that, we clearly have had ancestors that were not completely 100% Homo sapien. They were Neanderthals or things of that nature.
Right,
so,
which is in of itself a transition. Yeah. And I think just the reality of like saying, oh, we can change, but we can't change into anything that isn't us, is just kind of like, it doesn't quite make sense. Because if you can change, like, your toe's going to get 2-inch longer, it makes sense that your head could get 2-inch bigger, and that your biceps could tend to grow, 1/4 stronger, and then suddenly your energy distribution,
or even weaker based on the energy distribution. Exactly.
Right. And so the energy distribution, like, it just makes a lot of sense that those kind of changes could cause, a human to move more towards an ape style if their environment was demanding it.
Which is the Neanderthal. Basically, they had the
because
thicker
the
skulls
only difference between species
bones,
is literally that you can reproduce with them almost.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to just say like, oh, you can change this, but you absolutely couldn't just continue changing like that until you were something entirely different.
And what's really cool is to kind of theorize about the question that's beyond Homo sapiens. So it's what's next? Where are Homo sapiens going to evolve into? And the thing is that we could remain Homo sapiens for a long time.
Well, because of how effective our society is
really
at
cool.
giving everybody a chance, it's pretty much
that's
stalled out evolution.
True.
Because it doesn't matter how well suited you are in the environment, because
it's already met.
Everyone's pretty much given an opportunity. I mean, granted, some live much less equal lives and stuff. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say everyone's equal, but like, you have people who are autistic, or like the people we work with who are very who would struggle to take care of their own needs, but like we take care of them and stuff.
We take care of them, exactly.
Granted, most of them won't have a chance to reproduce, so like there's those kind of things where like we probably still evolve to some degree,
but it's drastically limited because we have done so well to meet humanity's needs. When I say greatly well, it's not, we think it needs to be done in a lot better and a lot more effective way based on the current system, but it's that on the whole humanity is not a starving community.
We're not competing for survival.
Exactly. We're not competing with anything. We're at the very top of the food chain. Like
we're
actually even out, like almost outside of the food chain, because everything's met to such a degree.
Right. Exactly. Mm-hmm. There's still like some aspects that like, of course, we're tied to evolution, but it's drastically limited, like you said.
But then to throw this in, people all say, "Oh man, but everything just seems so perfectly designed." And once you say that, I almost think that you don't understand the word perfect, because perfect means without flaw or without like any embellishment or the maximum potential. Humans don't even meet that criteria. We have a ton of flaws coming from a medical perspective, because that's what I'm studying. I'm studying medicine, and we have tons of flaws that are very interesting, such as why is our windpipe connected to where we're also eating, and it's blocked by the our epiglottis, and so when we swallow, our epiglottis closes to basically cover our windpipe to make sure that food or other passages don't go in there. But what's so interesting is, why would we be designed that way? Because if I was smart, if I was an engineer, I would make it so that they would basically, even while we were eating, we would be able to breathe out our noses or something like that, of that nature.
Right, disconnect it.
Right, and where we don't have such a choking hazard or things of that, like why don't we have better vision? Why do we have all these? And granted, like my medical science, while I'm studying in it, definitely means that I'm not perfect with it. So you guys can come at me with all the arguments. I'd be happy to learn more. But even just those small things that we could potentially fix.
Right.
The thing is that we clearly aren't perfect. We clearly are not this, like, the thing that we think that why it's perfect is because we can't conceive of anything better than nature. Because nature does a really good job at maintaining itself, and it does a really good job at surviving. It's nature. It's insane. Even when you pour concrete over freaking plants will eventually crack through it, which is nuts. But the thing is that none of these things are actually perfect. Evolution has just found a way to make them really effective at what they want to do. And just because they are effective does not mean that they are perfect, or it's even shown why some species are non-effective and they've died out. Because they were not effective, they were not great at what they did. There was something that did it better and could survive better. And because of that, species have died out. And so this nature is clearly not perfect. Even DNA, like our DNA does not write itself perfectly. It has errors whenever we're basically going through mitosis and meiosis, when we are basically converting our chromosomes and DNA, and we're just interacting with other cells. There is not a perfect system for it. There are flaws that go on, totally, and it's totally seeable. And the fact that people just say that it's perfect means that they have a very limited understanding of even humanity's nature, such as our chemical composition / molecular composition, to even just other species as well, even plants. And yeah, sorry to throw that in, but yeah, like people have a very limited understanding of what's going on, and they just assume it's perfect when it clearly isn't.
Yeah, or at least they
want to believe that it's perfect.
Yeah, they want to believe it's
God
perfect.
Created it.
And like any flaw is just, our earthly flaws.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a pretty good like ending where we've just kind of made our argument. Again, I just like to clarify our purpose. We're not like trying to come at a religion to like just destroy it and like show how much we hate it, as much as just make the argument for atheism and just be like, we actually believe this makes more sense. And
I was going to add, I think that's more of Danny's position, because I do attack it a little harder, and I think that's because I do think it has a lot of bad ideas and a lot of bad things going on. It doesn't mean that I want to destroy someone's opinion of I don't want to destroy someone as in like, oh man, I'm going to destroy you and I'm going to harm you. The thing is that I do want to change your ideas, and I will attack what you believe. But in retrospect, I expect you to attack what I believe as well. It's
right.
This isn't a one-way conversation. It's a two-way conversation, and I'm perfectly fine with being attacked. And but I am going to, I like to take the offensive when it comes to the church, because I feel like a lot of people don't understand the harm it does because a lot of people within the church say it does so much good. It does so much good. When I would argue it actually does more harm than good.
Agreed.
But that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same place.
But,
I should probably clarify as like, because we are going to attack it and like point out the flaws and the problems we think we have in it. But I guess our main purpose isn't to show our hatred towards the church as much as to convince people that there is just better ways of thinking that are less damaging.
Yeah. Because what I would just add is a lot of people might say that's a malicious intent. It's not malicious. The malicious intent would be to destroy it and to not help anyone. We want to help people, and that's where the good intent comes from. We want to help people but we're going to attack ideas and situations that have happened within this community.
Right.
And we're doing it out of a good intent. And that's where we come from. But either way, don't just take our words for it, because these are just our strange ideas.
Ooh.